In the manifestation of the power that lightens the earth with its glory, they will see only something which in their blindness they think dangerous. Something in which to arouse their fears, and they will brace themselves against it. Because the Lord does not work according to their expectations and their ideas, they will oppose the work. And you see, I don't think it takes a Jesuit. It may take an institution of learning, may take maybe parents or people who are compromising with the world to change our way of thinking so that we aren't ready for the loud cry and the latter rain when it comes. And if we're not ready, it'll be falling all around us, and we won't even realize it. And that's one of the more terrifying things of the future. Only those that are involved in doing missionary work, only those who have received the fullness of the early rain will receive and see the significance of the latter rain. Review and Herald, April 11, 1893, we read, "Many think that had they lived in Christ's day, they would have been among his believing followers. But if all the miracles of Christ were presented before those whose hearts are not subdued by the Spirit of God, their convictions would not be followed, nor their faith increased. Light has been shining upon the church of God, but many have said, by their indifferent attitude, we want not thy way, O God, but our way. The kingdom of heaven has come very near, and they have caught glimpses of the Father and the Son, but they have barred the door to the heart, and have not received the heavenly guests, for as yet they know not the love of God." There is less excuse in our day for stubbornness and unbelief than there was in the days of the Jews in the time of Christ. They did not have before them the example of a nation that had suffered retribution for their unbelief and disobedience. In our day, greater light and greater evidence is given. Our sin and its retribution will be the greater if we refuse to walk in the light. Many say, if I had only lived in the days of Christ, I would not have wrested his works or falsely interpreted his instruction. I would not have rejected and crucified him as did the Jews. But that will be proved by the way in which you deal with his message and his messengers today. When he sends his messages of mercy, the light of his truth, he is sending the Spirit of truth to you. And you accept the message, you accept Jesus. Those who declare that if they had lived in the days of Christ, they would not do as did the rejectors of his mercy, will today be tested on the message of 1888, the righteousness by faith of the everlasting gospel. This is solemn. Review and Herald, July 24, 1888, we read, "The solemn question should come home to every one of us in our churches. How are we standing before God as a professed followers of Jesus Christ? Are not the symptoms of decay and declension painfully visible in the midst of the Christian churches today? Spiritual death has come upon the people that should be manifesting life and zeal, purity and consecration by the most earnest devotion to the cause of truth. The facts concerning the real condition of the professed people of God speak more loudly than their profession and make it evident that some power has cut the cable that anchored them to the eternal rock, and that they are drifting away to sea without chart or compass. You may say you believe in Jesus when you have an appreciation of the cost of salvation, when you have an intelligent understanding, faith, that his death makes it possible for you to cease from sin and to perfect a righteous character. Friends, something has cut the cable, and we are drifting on a chartless sea. We need to let that just sink in. We have to go back and gather the scraps of truth. We must not wait for the latter rain. Letter 151, 1897. It is coming upon all who will recognize and appropriate the dew and the showers of grace that fall upon us. When we gather up the fragments of light, when we appreciate the sure mercies of God who loves to have us trust in him, then every promise will be fulfilled. For as the earth bringeth forth her bud, and as a garden causes the things that are sown in it to spring forth, so the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to spring forth before all nations. The whole earth is to be filled with his glory. So it's when we gather up the light that we already have. Don't expect another prophet to arise, another preacher of righteousness. Don't look to any man. God has given us all the light to get us to the kingdom. The latter rain will bring great light. There'll be truths that have been buried since the time of the apostles. But during that period, we'll see those truths. And not now, in this period of time. What will happen in a church who's moved in a direction of rejecting the truths that were sent to her from heaven? Well, we read in Book Evangelism, page 118, when light goes forth to lighten the earth, instead of coming up to the help of the Lord, they will want to bind about His work to meet their narrow ideas. Let me tell you that the Lord will work in this last work in a manner very much out of the common order of things, in a way that will be contrary to any human planning. There will be those among us who will always want to control the work of God, to dictate even what movement shall be made when the work goes forward under the direction of the angel who joins the third angel in the message to be given to the world. God will use ways and means by which it will be seen that He is taking the reins in His own hands. The workers will be surprised by the simple means that He will use to bring about and perfect His work of righteousness. Testimonies to Ministers 300 as well. God's hand is on the wheel. I will not allow men to control my work for these last days. This is God talking. My hand is turning the wheel. My providence will continue to work, and the divine plans, irrespective of human inventions. God will bring His purposes to pass. And so we recognize that in spite of what we know is going to happen, even among our own brethren, God is going to pull this thing through. Jesuits can't scare a faithful Adventist because they can't touch the faithful ones. All they can do is be part of God's sifting to those Adventists who will not stay faithful to duty. And when we take our eyes off of man and we keep our eyes on Christ, there's no power in heaven and earth that can bother us. We're sealed in by His love, and nothing can touch us. And so when we read a quotation like I'm about to read, it is not critical, it is prophecy. And we should be aware of it, and even our brethren in leadership positions should be aware of this. It's a blessing to them that God has opened these things up to us. The same evil work that has been done in the past will be carried forward under the guise of the General Conference Association. Now, this was an association back before the change of organization. The sacred character of this association is fast disappearing. Who will then be respected as pure, holy, and undefiled? Will there be any voice that God's people can respect as the voice to be respected? There certainly is nothing now that bears the divine credentials. Who can now feel sure that they are safe in respecting the voice of the General Conference Association? Much pride and loftiness of spirit which desires to rule has been manifested, but very little of the spirit which leads men to sit at the feet of Jesus and learn of Him has been shown. Human inventions and human plans are eclipsing sacred things and excluding divine instruction. Men are taking the place of God by seeking to assume authority over their fellow men. Letter to Elder Olson, Sunnyside, Korenbong, May 31, 1896. At the center of the work, matters are being shaped so that every other institution is following in the same course. And the General Conference itself is becoming corrupt with wrong sentiments and principles. Men have taken unfair advantage of those whom they suppose to be under their jurisdiction. They were determined to bring the individuals to their terms. They would rule or ruin. The high-handed power that has been developed as though position had made men gods makes me afraid and ought to cause fear. It is a curse wherever and by whomsoever it is exercised. This lording it over God's heritage will create such a disgust of man's jurisdiction that a state of insubordination will result. The people are learning that men in high positions of responsibility cannot be trusted to mold and fashion other men's minds and characters. The spirit of domination is extending to the presidents of our conferences. Satan exults, for he has inspired them with his attributes. They are following in the track of Romanism. Rule has been their course of action. Satan has had an opportunity of representing himself. They exalt themselves as men of superior judgment, and they have stood as representatives of God. These are false gods. Humanity is hailed as God. Testimony to our ministers, page 359 and 365. I would not say that this is a counsel that she is sending from the past now, but there are principles laid out in here that I see happening now. And I see movements of insubordination taking place. I see confusion happening because men are trying to decide for other men and force the work of God into their narrow ideas. And we need to be praying for these men. A converted person in a high position has a tremendous effect, and we need to be praying on our knees for these people. So I believe that there is danger in high position. I believe that Satan is there, and he takes advantage of it. A Jesuit or an infiltrator from outside does not have a hard work to do in the Adventist church. He doesn't have to work too hard here because Satan has been focusing on the conference of Seventh-day Adventists for a long time. And they will be there to watch, to gather information and send it to Rome. But they don't have all hard work on their hands. And I was told that men will employ every policy to make less prominent the differences between the faith of Seventh-day Adventists and those who observe the first day of the week. In this controversy, the whole world will be engaged, and the time is short. This is no time to haul down our colors. And I can apply that to today, I believe. No time to haul down our colors, because the world is involved in the Adventist church in trying to make the differences smaller between us and the world. And I can see Romanism involved in this type of activity secretly. I don't have any doubt about that. That's manuscript 15, 1896. And then the Lord has a controversy with his professed people in these last days. In this controversy, men in responsible positions will take a course directly opposite to that pursued by Nehemiah. Now, if you remember the history of Nehemiah, it was to build up Jerusalem. This is going to tear it down. They don't realize what they're doing. They will not only ignore and despise the Sabbath themselves, but they will try to keep it from others by burying it beneath the rubbish of custom and tradition. In churches and in large gatherings in open air, ministers will urge upon the people the necessity of keeping the first day of the week. So I see, again, Romanism involved here. Now, it doesn't have to be. It only takes a few people of strong minds in strong positions of rulership, and we have so many yes men that it'll just go like fire in the stubble when the influences begin to flow. So when Christ saw the Jewish people, a nation divorced from God, he saw also a professed Christian church united to the world and the papacy. Things are going to change in our future. They're changing very rapidly right now. And what I'm going to share with you right now will become startling. I don't know if the last quotes were a bit startling for you, but this is where it starts to get startling, and this is where you can see Romanism's influence. Slavery will again be revived in the South, for the spirit of slavery still lives, manuscript 22A, 1895. I am instructed to say to our people, throughout the cities of the South, let everything be done under the direction of the Lord. The work is nearing its close. We are nearer the end than we first believed. Satan is doing his best to block the progress of the message. He is putting forth efforts to bring about the enactment of a Sunday law that will result in slavery in the southern field and will close the door to the observances of the true Sabbath. I believe slavery will take place again. I don't know how, but I believe it'll take place. And I believe that you and I are watching the beginning of a movement that's going to cause it. The terrible situation of racism in the world today and the violence that's taking place in that arena. And that's from Letter 6, 1909. This piece of paper here says, this is a copy from the notebook of a Bible teacher. Now, my red flags go up when I read that. Who went to the vaults in Washington, second red flag, to investigate certain remarks made by an aged minister, third red flag. But unfortunately, I've asked too many ministers and seen it too often, and I believe that this is an accurate quotation. And so I feel comfortable in reading it to you tonight, especially in the light of the last one. And that is, there will be a racial uprising in the USA, and the army will be called out to put down the rebellion. And after the rebellion is put down, Congress will pass a law to again make the black men slaves. And this bill that goes through Congress to make the Negro slaves again will have a rider, which is the Sunday law, and it will be passed without being brought to the people for a vote. Now, I would compare it to the United States sending an ambassador to the Vatican. The people never had a chance. Never had a chance. And the entire Christian world, Protestant world in America, even those who are ecumenical, rose up against it. And it was as if there was no voice said at all from the people. And I believe this is going to happen. And I think we need to be watching the racial tension taking place, riots throughout the world, and the situation in South Africa. I dreamed that I was back in Battle Creek looking out from the side glass at a door and saw a company marching up to my house, 2 and 2. They looked stern and determined, and I knew them well, and turned to open the parlor door to receive them, but thought I would just look again. The scene changed. The company now presented the appearance of a Catholic procession. One bore in his hand a cross, another a reed, and as they approached, the one carried a reed made a circle around the house, saying 3 times, "This house is proscribed. The goods must be confiscated. They have spoken against our holy order." Terror seized me. I ran through the house, out of the door, and found myself in the midst of a company, some of whom I knew, but I dared not speak a word to them for fear of being betrayed. I tried to seek a retired spot where I might weep and pray without meeting eager, inquisitive eyes wherever I turned. I repeated frequently, "If I could only understand this, if I could only understand this, if they will tell me what I have said or what I have done." I wept and I prayed much as I saw our goods confiscated. I tried to read sympathy or pity for me in the looks of those around me and mark the countenances of several whom I thought would speak to me and comfort me if they did not fear that they would be observed by others. I made one attempt to escape from the crowd, but seeing that I was watched, I concealed my intentions. I commenced weeping aloud and saying, "If they would only tell me what I have done or what I have said." My husband, who was sleeping in the bed in the same room, heard me weeping aloud and awoke me. My pillow was wet with tears, and the sad depression of spirit was upon me. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, page 578. Omens, something not fully understood, but a vision of something. I don't fully understand it. One more thing to read, and you might be acquainted with this quotation already, but it gives us some idea of a movement behind the scenes that is bigger than we realize. The following is quoted from a letter by Father O'Brien of Rochester, New York, was printed in La Aurora, a magazine put out by the Italian Baptist Publishing House of Pennsylvania. "We, the hierarchy of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, expect all loyal children of the Church to assist the President with all our strength to see the individuals compromising the U.S. Supreme Court shall obey the President's injunction. And if necessary, we shall change, mend, or blot out the present Constitution so that the President may enforce his, or rather our, humanitarian program and all phases of human rights as laid down by our saintly popes in the Holy Mother Church. We elected our worthy President by the greatest majority ever recorded in history. We are going to have our laws made and enforced according to the Holy See and the popes and the canon laws of the papal throne. Our entire social structure must be built on that basis. Our educational laws must be constructed to that end, that atheism, the red peril of totalitarianism, Protestantism, communism, socialism, and all of other like ilk and stamp be driven from this fair land. The cross was planted on our shores by a staunch Roman Catholic. This land belongs to us by every right. Long enough have we compromised on every important question. Now we demand what is really ours, and we are going to have it. We will support our president in every way to obtain it, peacefully, honestly, if we may. If necessary, we are ready to fight and die for it. We want, as cabinet members, children of the Holy Mother Church, holding important positions in the entire structure of our government. We control America, and we do not propose to stop until America or Americans are genuinely Roman Catholic and remain so. God help us. That was written at the time when John F. Kennedy was the president. But he refused to bring religion into politics, and they butchered him. Now Ronald Reagan has been brought in under the same movement. And no one has ever done more for Roman Catholicism than Ronald Reagan has in the United States. I believe we're a lot closer because I don't know if you've noticed, but one of the men who will be running for president will be Pat Robertson, who's the head of the Christian Broadcasting Network in the United States. And this will mean a man brought in that's totally coming in for the purpose of bringing religion into government. Keep your eyes open. Watch the trends as they move along, because I understand from the Spirit of prophecy that God's people are the ones who catch the steady trend of events and follow prophecy. Could we have the lights out, and I'll go ahead into this program. I wanted to mention one more thing about this Ricci fellow, this Jesuit priest, Matteo Ricci. He did something that I think we need to look at and watch the pattern. First, he learned all of the religion of the Buddhist priest. He became a Buddhist priest, and when he found that that didn't influence the higher echelons of the culture in China, then he became a Mandarin, donned the clothing of a Mandarin, and presented the idea that he had a more advanced education. Then he learned their religion. He knew their language better than they did. He knew their religion better than they did. He wrote a Chinese catechism. He became a religious teacher of their own religion, quoting fluently from their religion. And then he was able to show the comparison between, he took tenets of the religion in China that corresponded to Catholicism, and he began to dwell on that. And then after a while, he began to then cast questions about it and point out that the highest form of the true worship was that which is found in Catholicism. This is a trend that Nobili did in India again. And I think you'll be able to see that trend taking place in our midst. You watch for this. Watch for a man who comes in that will fluently quote the spirit of prophecy, appear to preach everything as Adventists believe it. And as time goes along, he will point to a higher order of religion. And that order of religion will be none other than binding us up with the rest of the Christian world. And these things, of course, are happening on all levels in our church today. And to me, it's an evidence that these men are working among us. They could enter any religion, and when they needed more help, they sent back to the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, who quickly trained these men whose minimum IQ was 150 to memorize, learn the language, the people, and come over donned in their clothing and take over any country, any government. They also worked with the primitives, and many, many, many thousands were claimed to the Roman Catholic faith. Many of these Jesuit priests, especially in America, gave their lives as martyrs for the Roman Catholic cause, as they had developed the ability. And you realize that if they have 1/12 of their year, that means 30 days out of a year, that means 1/12 of their time is totally immersed in self-hypnosis. And they learn how to control their feelings. They could face the stake, just as a Christian could, but with Satan controlling their mind. But this is how they had such a powerful influence. It says that they allowed their proselyted Christians to commit idolatry by a subtle evasion, that of allowing them to hide under their clothes an image of Jesus, and if they rendered by mental reservation their adorations to that, they could carry on their occult rites, you see. This way they had thousands on the books, the Catholic books, millions on the books that were no more than pagans. The Jesuits infiltrated the Dominican order and gained control of the Inquisition. They turned it into a science that infiltrated all levels of society. In Portugal, it was Loyola himself that erected the Inquisition there in 1545 and 6. Throughout the world then, a greater terror now took place as these geniuses, controlled by Satan, moved upon the Reformation people and mercilessly wiped them out. Now, we think of Europe as the arena, but you have to realize that the great armadas of Portugal and Spain went through China. They even went to Japan. These armadas went to India, and with them they brought the Jesuit inquisitors. When they came to these countries, they ran into the ancient church in the wilderness that kept the seventh-day Sabbath and believed as you and I do. When they did this, they forced the leaders to capitulate, or they tortured them. And many, many people were slaughtered by the Portuguese soldiers. And little is known in history today how many Seventh-day Adventists were destroyed in China, where we know there was over 6 million at one time. In fact, in 1625, outside of Chang'an, China, they found a large stone, a great boundary stone that had once been set up there, when an apostle, an Adventist man by the name of Adam, in the 7th and 8th centuries, was the head of the Church of China. And on that stone, the Mandarins and the Jesuits worked together. They saw this stone was a danger to both of their religions. And so they decided to destroy all the Chinese characters. Below that were some Syrian characters that they couldn't read. And so they abolished this record of the Sabbath-keeping church throughout all of China. And they left the Syrian. And although they put new Chinese letters there, we can read Syrian today. And it tells of the vast reaches of the Seventh-day Adventist Church throughout the Orient from Syria at that time. The record of the past, when we can find out what happened, are so hideous to us that it leaves us weak. But these Jesuits took an oath to take over the Protestant churches, and as rapidly as they could, they made their way through the Protestant world. The Vatican established a school that in every major campaign and every work of infiltration, another segment of this university was set up for these studies overseas and in Europe. This is called the Pontifical Gregorian University, and it's dedicated to setting up the Roman Catholic Church as a one-world system. These institutions of learning spread all over Europe and around the world, and the Jesuits had more wealth and more power than any other order had ever had. They were a government within themselves. Here we are again with this book from 1667, The Fiery Jesuits, and I know it's so hard to read the writing from way back then, but I'll try to read it. He says that what we're about to read comes from a Jesuitical creed gathered out of the works of John Baptista Poza, a Spanish Jesuit by Franciscus Royales, a doctor of Salamanca. So that's where this stuff comes from. And this is one of the quotations in that book. I believe in two gods. One is Son, Father, and Mother, metaphorically, according to a temporal generation, and the other metaphorically, Mother and Father, according to a temporal generation. And what is consequent here, too, that the common term Mother, Father may be equally attributed to both God and the Virgin Mary, as if they were both hermaphrodites. And, of course, this was the esoteric view of God, that he was both the male and female principle in one being. And entire houses or temples were set up to worship the God who was bisexual. And this was the origin of homosexuality and lesbianism in the world. It came through the worship of nature and emulating what they believed God was like. But this symbol of a God, both male and female, is no more than the symbol of the devil, and that is what the religion of the Jesuits worship. Now, I'll try to interpret this too. It says here that while thus by their shameful credenda they account the blood of Christ an unholy thing and do despite under the Spirit of grace, we find no less than 40 years ago, Mr. W. Crashaw, in his book entitled The Jesuit Gospel, did clearly give evidence from their approved writers several other damnable doctrines of the same strain with those forementioned asserted by them, viz., that Mary's milk may be compared with the blood of Christ, yea, that the merit and virtue of it is more excellent than Christ's blood. It's hard to believe that these educated men had these strange, bizarre, occult beliefs. But then when you look at this from their own writings, it says they affirm that the diligence of an expert conjurer in diabolical arts, that theurgy, that's the darkest form of art in witchcraft, using demonic powers, may well be thought worthy a reward, and that a fortune teller is not obliged to restitution if he has consulted the devil, nor to confession, though he hath expressly invocated the devil, and that it is lawful to consult a conjurer. Devil worship was something that was worthy of a reward as far as the Jesuits were concerned, and they worshipped a hermaphroditic deity. And these were the secret doctrines that Ignatius Loyola believed and are taught to the secret initiates into Jesuitism. Many of the Jesuits became the leading occultists in the world, astrologers in the courts of nobles and kings, magicians. In fact, I don't know if you've heard of this man by the name of mesmerism. Mesmer got his beliefs of hypnotism from studying the work of one of these Jesuit magicians. The Soul Hustlers by Rennie Nordbergen, which can be bought in the Book of Bible Houses in the States, has an interview with Jean Dixon. And it says, she says, as a child I was taught Chaldean astrology by a wise and wonderful man, a Jesuit priest, Father Henry. I don't see how anyone can say that astrology is wrong. After all, he was a man of God. No, he wasn't, Jean. He was a worshiper of the devil. And you made a big mistake. Jean Dixon, a devout Roman Catholic, is one of the most prominent occultists in the United States. She even does the horoscopes and counsels presidents and very prominent individuals. In the book Goury's Doctrine of the Jesuits, this book was written by a French parliamentarian when he was trying to convince Parliament to give up allowing the Jesuits to be involved in education in their country. And so he studied out the kind of teachings that Jesuits received for the confessional, and he discovered some very interesting things. And this is the decree that Parliament made after they studied his work. It says, these doctrines, the consequence of which would destroy natural law, that rule of morality which God himself has implanted in the hearts of men, and consequently would break all the ties of civil society in authorizing theft, lying, perjury, the most criminal impurity, and generally all passions and all crimes, by the teaching of secret compensation, equivocation, of mental restrictions, of probabilism and philosophical sin, destroy all feelings of humanity among men, and authorizing homicide, parricide, annihilate royal authority, and so on. Through the confessional, they were able to excuse any sin that a man wanted to do. And even today, we see the dangerous results of Roman Catholic philosophy in dealing with sin. This magazine article came out September 1985, as San Diego was ripped apart by this situation hitting the news media. The Pope acts on a plea by loyal laymen against homosexual priests. They had tried for years because their children were being seduced. Their little boys were being seduced in the confessionals by the priests throughout all of San Diego. And the Catholic Church would not listen to them. Finally, they sent their appeal to the Vatican itself and kept hounding on them. But the Vatican went down, and what could they do? The priests themselves controlled what priests came into their district, and they ensured that all of them would be homosexual. So you have a whole segment, and I'm talking about a huge area where all of the priests are homosexual and seducing little children in the confessional. And it's almost impossible to move it. Even the Vatican can't stop it. The facts are that if we were able to unveil the corruption that goes on in the confessional, we'll see one of the most immoral situation that's ever come before mortal man. But because of the confessional and the psychoanalysis ability of the Jesuits, the priests and the rulers would come to them. These men would pour their hearts out before their Jesuit confessor. And these confessors, claiming to keep these things in confidence, were all agents of the Vatican, and they sent all information they received from the nobility of the world back to the general, with the result that they knew every secret of state and they could give counsel then in the confessional to direct the whole movement of society. This is Henry going to confessional in France, and due to the Jesuit involvement, the Bartholomew's Day massacre, where 60,000 people were killed, took place. It was their guiding. They're the ones that directed the plan to have a Huguenot leader marry a Catholic leader. And then at the time that it looked like all the Protestants and Catholics were joining hands in this great ecumenical gesture, they planned that very night to destroy all the Protestants. The ecumenical movement is a death knell for the Protestant world. I'll skip that. When we go to Ireland, we see that the same thing happened there. It appeared to be a union between Protestantism and Catholicism, and while the Protestants went to sleep and allowed the Catholicism more freedom, the result was one of the terrible bloodbaths. And still today, the agitation in that part of the world is terrible. We walked through that. We almost lost our lives there, and sometime I could tell you the story. I didn't know how bad it was there. The most stupid thing I could do was walk right through the middle of all that fighting and be a stranger from the United States. But you can see the churches were all barbed wired off. This train station was barbed wired off as buildings were blown up and little children running the streets as little mobs throwing rocks and bricks at people. And that's the result of Roman Catholicism. The Jesuits became accustomed to luxury in the courts of kings. They surrounded the Lewises. This is Louis XV. His confessor, of course, was a Jesuit, and this is his bedroom. Those chairs would be filled by the heads of state as they came in every morning for a meeting with their ruler. But before that he would do anything, he would grab one of them and take him in bed and pull the curtain around, and then he would release them, and they'd carry on their activity. And this was done under the confessorship of the Jesuits. But the magnificent world of wealth that they lived in and the power that they had, it was almost inconceivable to them that their power could ever be broken. But England broke away from the papacy, and the church continued to send Jesuits in for years and years, trying to continue a revolution against the government. These Jesuits were hunted mercilessly, but they really caught very few of them. One Jesuit I was reading about had 12 aliases and spoke six languages with accents in each language, so everyone thought that he was a foreigner. One captain came in, and he was being checked out by the police, and he said, I know of 2 Jesuits that are coming into the country. Oh, yeah, well, tell me all about them. Oh, yeah. And he described the Jesuit to a T, and he said he'd be like this, and he had just headed into the country, and the police were listening and writing everything down. And he says, oh, by the way, he said, I've helped you out. Now, will you help me out? I have a friend that's coming in on the next ship, and I'd like for you to just pass him and let him come on in. Oh, sure, we'll do that. That's fine. And then later they found that this man and the other man were the 2 Jesuits that were coming into the country. They couldn't stop them hardly. They had some people that were trying, they had gotten hold of Catholics that would turn these men in, and finally they surrounded this castle that was supposed to be the headquarters of the Jesuits plotting in England. And when they broke into the castle, they found it was a massive maze of passages and rooms, and they couldn't hardly find their way in and out of the place. But finally, after a thorough search, they left it. They didn't see anyone there. But an informer later told them that there were secret partitions in the walls where these people were hiding, and they'd been there the whole time. Finally, they decided, we've got it. The police in England, you know that Scotland Yard is such a brilliant investigating agency. And you know, what's that fellow with the pipe and everything? Yeah, that's right. And so they decided what they were going to do. They were going to find out, they were going to trace everybody that has the skill of building secret passageways in houses. There was only 3 people in the country that were absolutely the best at this, and they were sure that one of them was the Jesuit. And so they looked up 2 of them, and they looked up one of them, and he was cleared. And then they looked for the other 2, and they found out he was the same man under 2 names. And they had their man. And so they made their way to a house where they knew he was hiding. They surrounded the house. They went in. And Scotland Yard, I don't know what they called themselves back then, but they tore the walls apart. They ripped up the floors. They pulled the ceiling out. They knocked out the chimney. They destroyed the place. You know, too bad for the people that owned the house. But they couldn't find him, and they knew he was there. And they all left after hours of demolishing this beautiful home, went to their horses, and off they went. And then the Jesuit, who was hiding under the dining table with the cloth over the table, crawled out. He was a bit stiff from waiting so long while all this racket was going on around him. But there's a lot of stories about the Jesuits in England. But one thing is for sure, the evidence is that the great burning of London was caused by the Jesuits. On the back of this little book from 1667 is a picture of the Pope fanning the fires of London and Jesuits lighting fires all over the world. Now, I have to go through this again. I'm going to skip it. Sorry, it's so hard to read that stuff. You know, if you notice, in the classical language, the F's are the S's. And that goes way, way, way back to the ancient Greek, classical Greek, where it was the symbol of the serpent. You'll find it all through these old, and I can hardly read this stuff. Anyway, the expulsion of the Jesuit from Latin America, it lays out the fact that in Latin America and South America, the Jesuits set up whole, perfectly beautiful communist societies among the Indians. The only time that the communist system has ever worked was done by the Jesuits in those experiments way back then. But rumors came back to Portugal and Spain that the Jesuits were hoarding tremendous amounts of gold, and they were requested to give it up. They wouldn't obey the governments. Complaints went to the Vatican, and before long, the Jesuits were being expulsed. Now, I believe there was a lot more to that because Portugal owed a lot to the Jesuits, and so did Spain. But in time, because of the intrigues and the dangers of the Jesuits, they tore apart their buildings and sent them out of the country. Finally, it was in 1773 that enough pressure came upon the Vatican that the Pope dissolved the Jesuit order. He said when he did that he was destroying himself, and he was poisoned soon after that. But a more terrible persecution came upon those poor Jesuits, as from one country to another, after so much hatred was directed towards them, they were tied up in dungeons, they were tied up in the hulls of ships, they were forced to secularize themselves or be tortured and died. And many of these people, some ships were sent clear out to sea just to let them starve to death and rot. Others were dumped off on islands. There they starved. Some rotted in prisons, and others were sent clear out to Goa in India, and there they had to try to find a way of life there. But the Jesuits cannot be beat, not by powers of this world, only by Jesus Christ. And in Russia, Catherine the Great kept the Jesuit order, and there they carried on all of their functions. They continued to vote, and they continued to carry on their ancient religion, with the result that in the early 19th century, when the Jesuits were allowed to reform, absolutely nothing was lost. They had reorganized during that time under the various Catholic societies and continued to function. Now, this is the government of the Jesuit order. At the top is the general. Below that is provincial, those who are heads over whole areas in the world. And then below that are the superiors who head up the houses and the colleges, and so on. And then below that are the vast network of Jesuit espionage agency. This is an elaborate agency. They're to tell on each other as well as everything else. Everyone is alone, having to obey everything that the superior says. The superior is to make a detailed report to the provincial, and then the provincial has to give a summary report monthly to the general, while the superiors go over their heads and give a report periodically too. In this way, a balance is made. The general is subject himself to a council of 6 men, why 6, elected by the general congregation. 4 are elected from 4 different countries. One is an advisor and military commander, and the other is a general's confessor. One or the other of the latter two must be with him at all times. So he himself is under the control of the whole body, while he is supposed to be Jesus Christ in person. And we were watching one of these Jesuit ceremonies. Some priest was being initiated, or something was happening there. Since I don't understand Italiano, I didn't know what was going on, or Latin or whatever. But I was very intrigued. The prelate came out covered with gold, with a black hood and a cross on his forehead, and a staff that had 2 serpents intertwined. It may have been another order that was related to the Jesuits. But the Jesuit ruler is the most powerful man in the world. There's no doubt about it. The general has usually stood towards the Pope. much as a powerful grand feudatory of the Middle Ages did towards a weak titular Lord Paramount, or perhaps as a captain of a splendid host of Freemasons did towards a potentate with whom he chose to take temporary and precarious service. The shrewd Roman populace have long shown their recognition of this fact by styling these two great personages severally the White Pope and the Black Pope. In truth, the society has never from the very first obeyed the Pope whenever its will and his will have happened to run counter. If you could picture it like this, here's the great structure of the Roman Catholic Church throughout the world. Although it's a big lordly structure, it's a weak organization. But here is the Jesuits, who on the surface appear to be a small, humble group that are under the auspices of the Vatican. But the fact is that the Jesuit is a little church in a big church, is really the powerful church in a weak church. And it dominates and it controls it. Jesuit power arrived at such an height that when the Italian de Acquaviva came to be Father General, he gave his hand to be kissed as the Pope is told. In their constitutions, the Father General is called Dei Legatus in Christi Vicarius, one of which, having the title, regarded not the Pope's message, though sent to him by two cardinals, enjoining everybody in the Jesuit society to acknowledge Christ present in himself, the general. How far does this go? Well, listen to the words of the Jesuits themselves. Our Father General, as all know, governs Rome itself and the popedom. We make war at our pleasure between one prince and another, between a prince and his subjects, usurp dominion over cities and countries, fearing no discovery of our actions, since our commerce is with the great men. We know every public secret and can, in a singular way, dispatch heretics and enemies to the Roman court. In 1627, at the University of Krakow, they portrayed Ignatius as holding the world in his hand with fire streaming out. And this was the motto: I came to send fire into the world. But this next one is the one that shocked me when I read it. This is a quotation preached by F. Doza J.S. It says, "In these last days God hath spoken to us by his Son Ignatius, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the world." The reason that they have so much power is their discipline for obedience. For a fear readily to declare his assent and consent to his superior an act of obedience when he says the snow is black or the crow is right, bidding light the candle at the wrong end, or the like, is the formal property of this Constitution. To yield perfect, absolute, and unlimited obedience to him they call Christ's Vicar, and they mean it, Christ's Vicar, see? By the abdication of their own will and judgment, they are the staff in the old man's hand. We should always be ready to accept this principle. I will believe that the white that I see is black if the hierarchical church so defines it. And that's from Ignatius himself. The order is filled with dishonesty from the upper ranks to the lower, never knowing what the people who the real work of the Jesuit order fall on know why they're doing the work and the broad plans. This is worked out in this way. Those who are studying are called novices. They're learning. They're becoming a part of the Jesuits. But those who are teaching them are the scholars, the graduates. The temporal are those who are in charge of administrating the houses and the universities and colleges of the Jesuits. The coadjutors become the actual agents to carry out plans throughout the world. And then the next level of Jesuits is called the professed of the 3 vows and then the 4 vows. That's the actual Jesuit order that makes up a government structure that is able to make plans. Everybody else obeys everything they're told without question, almost under a hypnotic situation. But the strangest of all is that little circle in the middle called the M. It is the mysteries of the Jesuit order, and very few of the Jesuits are knowing what's in those mystery teachings, the occult teachings of the secret society. Now, I'm going to share with you just some excerpts from the ceremony of the induction and extreme oath of the Jesuit. I have the full thing, but it's so long. And this is from Library of Congress. It gives a catalog card number there. And this oath goes like this: "My son, you have been taught to act the dissembler. Among the Roman Catholics, to be a Roman Catholic, and to be a spy even among your own brethren, to believe no man, to trust no man. Among the Reformers, to be a Reformer. Among the Huguenots, be a Huguenot. Among the Calvinists, be a Calvinist. Among the Protestants, generally be a Protestant. And obtaining their confidence to seek even to speak from their pulpits, and to denounce with all the vehemence in your nature our holy religion and the Pope, and even to descend so low as to become a Jew among the Jews, that you might be enabled to gather together all information for the benefit of your order as a faithful soldier of the Pope. You have been taught your duties as a spy, to gather all statistics, facts, and information in your power from every source, to ingratiate yourself into the confidence of the family circle of Protestants and heretics of every class and character, as well as that of the merchant, the business people, you see, the banker, the lawyer, among the schools and universities and parliament and in legislatures, in judiciaries and councils of state, and to be all things to all men for the Pope's sake, whose servants we are unto death. You have been taught to insidiously plant the seeds of jealousy and hatred between states that were at peace, and incite them to deeds of blood, involving them in war with each other, and to create revolutions and civil wars in communities, provinces, and countries that were independent and prosperous, cultivating the arts and the sciences, enjoying the blessings of peace. And when you think about that for a minute, what about all of the violence that's taking place in the world today, in countries that are trying desperately to bring peace out of the chaos, and it keeps slipping through their hands like sand? It's the work of Romanism to bring about their control of the world again. To take sides with the combatants and to act secretly in concert with your brother Jesuit, who might be engaged on the other side, but openly opposed to that with which you might be connected, only that the Church might be the gainer in the end, in the conditions fixed in the treaties for peace, and that the end justifies the means. You have received all your instructions heretofore as a novice and neophyte, and have served as a coadjutor, confessor, and priest, but you have not yet been invested with all that is necessary to command in the army of Loyola in the service of the Pope. You must serve the proper time as the instrument and executioner, as directed by your superiors. For, and listen to this, none can command here who has not consecrated his labors with the blood of a heretic. For without the shedding of blood, no man can be saved. Therefore, to fit yourself for your work and make your own salvation sure, you will, in addition to your former oath of obedience to your order and allegiance to the Pope, repeat after me. I promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and wombs of their women, crush their infants' heads against the walls, in order to annihilate forever their execrable race. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisoned cup, the strangulating cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet, regardless of honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the person or persons, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as at any time may be directed so to do by any agent of the Pope or superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Faith. And I just hate to say it, you know, Holy Faith, the Society of Jesus, so much blasphemy. But this is the secret of how these men, and one man in India became an untouchable, not an untouchable, but a Brahman, worked within the government. He was a Jesuit. He was put in that position for 30 years. With no contact with the Jesuits or the church that he was a part of. Now, I'm only 35 years old. What if for 30 years now I set myself right in the center of devil worship? Would I be a faithful Adventist at the end of that? It'd be very strange if I was. This man, 30 years, and at the end of 30 years, when he was contacted by the Jesuits, he immediately obeyed and did everything he was told to do to open up the government for the Jesuit infiltration. And so this, I believe, is one of the secrets. We imbue into him spiritual forces, which he would find very difficult to eliminate later. These forces can come up again to the surface, sometimes after years of not even mentioning them, and become so imperative that the will finds itself unable to oppose any obstacle and has to follow their irresistible impulse. I believe that through the exercises of Loyola, these men become possessed through their initiation. and that Satan controls their minds. The scenes of hell can come up again to them and terrify them into doing anything that they're told to do. But that's not all of it. There's more to this thing. I believe the Jesuits form really a small part of the work, but they direct others. It says that secular persons of both sexes join to the company by a resignation of themselves absolutely to the conduct of the professed fathers. These usually are gentlemen and merchants who immix themselves in court and city business and into offices, bargains, and sales, or active gentlewomen and rich widows who, like a plantation of the Indies, bring into the society a vault of revenue of gold and silver. When we look at an organization such as the Knights of Columbus, we realize that here an organization, one of the most powerful in the United States, dedicated to infiltrating the democratic structure, especially to cause chaos and rebellion in our political system through the educational system. Here we see young men taking oaths of dedication to the Jesuits, to the Knights of Columbus, and even young women, the daughters or the ladies of Mary. Even President Reagan had to go before the Knights of Columbus and make a speech in his efforts to become president. I have the full oath, but these are just a couple of excerpts out of the Knights of Columbus oath. And it says, I will place Catholic girls in Protestant families, that a weekly report may be made of the inner movements of heretics, that I will provide myself with arms and ammunition, that I may be in readiness when the word is passed. Or I am commanded to defend the church, either as an individual or with the militia of the Pope. In testimony hereof, I take this holy and blessed sacrament of the Eucharist and witness the same further with my name written with the point of this dagger dipped in my own blood and sealed in the face of the Holy Sacrament. I do further promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and Masons. And that's only for the lower orders. In the upper orders, there's no animosity between Masonry and Catholicism. We'll talk about that in spiritualism tomorrow. As I am directed to do, to extirpate them from the face of the earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, bury alive these infamous heretics, open up the stomachs and wombs of their women, crush their infants' heads against the walls, in order to annihilate their execrable race. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisonous cup, the strangulation cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet. Regardless of honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the person, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, should I prove false or weaken in my determination, may my brother and the fellow militia of the Pope cut off my hands and feet, cut my throat from ear to ear. May my belly be opened and sulfur burned therein with all the punishments that can be inflicted upon me on earth, and my soul shall be tormented by demons in eternal hell forever. That I will, in always vote for a Knight of Columbus. How strong are these people today? They're stronger than they ever have been before in history. And you won't know them by meeting them on the street. In the book Catholic Power Today by Avro Manhattan, he gives a description of another group. The Catholic Church now has adopted simultaneously with carrying on the old traditional religious organizations a strategy of gradualness directed at the smooth identification of her most advanced weapons of penetration. Hence the creation of a peculiarly suited religious, semi-religious, and even lay bodies whose aim is to infiltrate the various strata of our society. The last few decades have seen the multiplication of such movements of penetration called secular institutes. Their members generally are people who, although laymen, have the same fervor and determination to fight for the church as have the traditional religious orders. Thus, while taking the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, they do not wear special clothes. They have ordinary jobs and mainly live at home. They avoid the spotlight and keep their membership a secret not only from their offices and factory, their co-workers and friends, but even from their own families. This termite-like secret army is a vast international, the growth of these semi-lay and lay orders whose members are unrecognizable, even to Catholics themselves, in these last few decades has been phenomenal, particularly in Protestant England and in the United States. Catholic Power Today, Avro Manhattan, page 33. We see a mountain rising up against us when the veil is pulled aside. And we know that it's going to take the world in. That's what we see in prophecy. Our work is to tear the veil aside so more people have a chance to make a choice for Jesus Christ in these last days. There's so much deception out there, and you and I have a responsibility to unveil. I have a quotation here that says that men are going to stand in our pulpits, ministers, with a torch of false prophecy. I was so concerned about this. I was asked a while back to write a book that would expose counterfeit prophecies in the church. I had made a mistake earlier of painting a picture for a dear Christian man who was writing a book on Revelation. I painted the cover for the book. I needed the eats. I didn't know it was in the book, and I should have read it first, and I apologize to any of you who have read that book tonight. But the book was written by a man who almost had his doctorate degree in clinical psychology. And he's an anesthesiologist at a hospital nearby. His name is Robert Hauser. And I went ahead and wrote the book under the request of a number of lay ministries. And it's only 75 pages long, and I think that it would be worth your reading, because it brings quite a number of things to view, especially from the spirit of prophecy in these last days. Is this the manuscript? Oh, okay. Anyway, the manuscript wasn't finished in time, but for this meeting, but it will be available. And if you'd like to get a copy of it, it'll only be $2 each, and I think that they'll take your name at the back table back there if you'd like to get a hold of it. But it explains from the spirit of prophecy how we are to support, or how we are to approach the subject of prophecy at this time in history. And I think you'll really appreciate the reading of this.